New year of competitive Pokemon kicked off this weekend at the 2024 Portland Regional Championships. While it wasn't really the beginning of a new season, it was the beginning of a new format, Regulation F. The release of the Indigo Disc DLC gave trainers a myriad of new strategies to play with. So what came out on top? Let's take a look. This event, held at the Oregon Convention Center on January 6th, had a unique storyline built into it that gave us an extra layer of drama. We watched 501 Masters try their best to prevent Joseph Ugarte from winning a Portland Regional for the third time in a row.
Is going to claim the Portland Regional Championships after winning this tournament in 2019 as well.
Joe was the honorary protagonist of this event, but he was by no means the only important character. 10 of the top 16 ranked players in North America were in attendance, and we even got a surprise registration from a decorated German veteran, Barish Akos. As I mentioned, this was the first Regulation F tournament. The first major of a new format is always fun. We basically get to watch the best players in the world try to solve a difficult new equation on a pretty tight turnaround. Whether that results in chaos or brilliance, it's always entertaining. This particular format rotation was highly anticipated. New Pokemon were just added to the game. A new Terra mechanic called Stellar Terra was introduced, and familiar faces from generations past just rejoined the decks. Incineroar in particular being the most familiar face. So many questions were waiting to be answered at this tournament. Will the new Pokemon change the meta? Will Incineroar restore balance? The first day of Swiss gave us a great lineup of fantastic matches. In round 3 we got a match between two of the game's youngest active regional champions, Abdullah Muhaydin and Dylan Salvanera. Both players bet their tournaments on one of the newest threats in the metagame, Entei. Supported by Chi and Pao's Sword of Ruin and making great use of its fire typing, Entei is an easy addition to offensive teams that want priority and use Inner Focus to block Fake Out and Intimidate. Dylan's team had a Choice Scarf Landorus and Ogerpon Wellspring with Follow Me, while Abdullah opted for a similar typing and utility but with Gyarados and Rillaboom. With Scarf, Landorus is fantastic for pressuring Ogerpons and faster threats like Fluttermane with Flying Terra Blast. I want to also note that Abdullah's choice of Rillaboom and Gyarados do not match up well into that. To make things worse, due to a team sheet error on his Entei's ability, Abdullah was penalized with a game loss. Ironically, the production staff also made some team sheet errors themselves, but no sources have confirmed if they were given game losses or not yet. Game 2 starts off with some scouting. Abdullah checks what the Fluttermane will lock itself into and also gets to see the Ogerpon click Follow Me rather than attack. Following turn, Abdullah attempts to pick off the Ogerpon with an Icicle Crash E-Speed combo, but just barely misses the KO. Fluttermane goes for a Dazzling Gleam and gets the POW down to its Focus Sash, but the Ogerpon flinches. One more E-Speed finally knocks out the Ogerpon, and Chi and Pao rips a Sucker Punch to chunk some health off of the Flutter as it goes for a Dazzling Gleam and knocks out POW. Gyarados comes in for Abdullah, and Raging Bolt comes in for Dylan. The next turn was pivotal. Abdullah doesn't have Protect on his Gyarados, but he does have a Ghost Terra. He makes a soft read going for the Helping Hand to try and avoid a possible Thunderclap, but Dylan just goes right for the Dazzling Gleam and Thunderbolt and gets the KO on the Gyarados. Fluttermane finally comes in for Abdullah, and he ends up not being faster, taking the damage from Gleam before getting a knockout. This sets up a position where, because Dylan preserved Terra, was able to go for Terra Flying with Landorus, and with the Choice Scarf outspeed everything and clean the game up. In round 6, we got to see some more of the new toys added to Regulation F, piloted by one of the game's hottest players right now, Raghav Malavia. Their opponent, Anton Galkin, was in my opinion using the most interesting team of the weekend. Redirection Goldengo on a Tailwind team won the first regional in Regulation E. Why wouldn't an updated version have a good shot at winning the first Regulation F tour? In Game 1, Raghav leads with Fluttermane and Incineroar, immediately pressuring big damage into the Goldengo with Shadow Ball, and Incineroar has Fake Out to stop a Follow Me from the Ogerpon. But Anton aggressively Terra Steals to ignore this pressure and gets the nasty plots going. After taking out the Ogerpon, Tornadus comes in and gives us one of the wildest turns of the entire weekend. A Metal Coat Terra Steel +4 Make It Rain from Goldengo one-shots and Incineroar from full health, and from there, it was over. In Game 2, Anton leads the same, but Raghav adjusts. Instead of Fluttermane being the tool to pressure a turn 1 knockout, Landorus would do a much better job not caring about the Terra Steel threat from the Goldengo. Raghav uses this pressure to get a substitute up as Anton repositions to Regidrago and Tornadus. Anton then makes a slight miscalculation, clicking Dragon Energy, which is an HP based move, and after taking a Sheer Force Life Orb Earth Power straight to the head or shoulder pad, it does minimal damage. Going for Draco would have probably led to the KO. Once going back into Goldengo, again Anton gets aggressive, doesn't even go for a Terra in front of a possible Shadow Ball, and then goes for a nasty plot, which was pretty punishing for Rogov. After tricky board position maneuvering, the Incin is put in a position to survive a boosted Make-Up Rain in a clutch moment, and gets the KO on the Goldengo to bring the set to a Game 3. In Game 3, Anton adjusts, sending out a Tornadus and Incineroar lead. This punishes Rogov's Landorus Incarnate lead pretty hard, because it has Icy Wind to chunk the ground flying type. After a few Icy Winds, and a timely pivot into Goldengo, Anton only needs to get a Tailwind off and unleash a Terra Steel Make-It Rain to take the lead in the set. Once the Torn is close to getting knocked out, Tailwind is ready to launch, and Anton's Dengo is clear to clean the game into Rogov's mismatched Fluttermane and Rillaboom left in the back. Round 8 featured Nora Bowman and America's most recently crowned regional champion, Giovanni Costa. Gio was using almost a carbon copy of their San Antonio winning team, but with Incineroar over Iron Hands and a Stellar Terra on their Urshifu. And Nora was using a Registeel. Registeel's a neat Pokemon. With Clear Body, the highest special defense stat of legal steel types tied with Goodra, you just slap a Water Terra onto it so you don't lose to Urshifu crits, and you have a solid Iron Defense Body Press sweeper. And typically that would work, at least against the more common Urshifu, Rapid Strike. Gio, however, had Urshifu Single Strike, which kinda looks like a bad matchup for Nora. That really wasn't the case though. In Game 1, Nora aggressively leads the Incineroar and Registeel anyway, right into Fluttermane and Urshifu. Gio immediately goes for the Stellar Terra Close Combat and Shadow Ball double up into the Incineroar. And this covers exactly what happens, the Incineroar terastallizing. The combo barely misses the KO because of Citrus Berry, but in response, Incineroar Flare Blitz's Dengo, takes enough recoil that it faints, and Registeel fires off a Body Press into the Urshi, which does huge damage after the defense drop. This was an excellent play that gets Nora into position with her Fluttermane against two extremely low health targets. Because of the pressure that this puts on, Gio was bound to make a mistake, and Nora capitalized. Fluttermane clicks Dazzling Gleam, and as the Goldengo swaps out to Fluttermane, Registeel is ready to punish with a Heavy Slam. After clearing out the Flutter, Ogerpon Wellspring comes in for Gio. Even though Gio is able to take out the Fluttermane, once Ogerpon Wellspring comes in for Nora, the Iron Defense setup is too strong, and it cleans out the rest of the game from there. In Game 2, Nora makes a really smart play. Gio leading Fluttermane and Urshifu really pressures Fluttermane on Nora's side because of the threat of Icy Wind and Wicked Blow, but Nora predicts that Gio will change the game plan. So instead, Nora leads Fluttermane and Registeel into Goldengo and Incineroar. Nora leading Fluttermane immediately pressures the Goldengo and forces out a Terastallization. This severely limits the options that Gio has defensively. With no reason to fake out under threat of a Farigiraf swap in, Nora's Incin clicks knockoff into Gio's, and Iron Defense gets set up right away. A series of offensive trades ends up leaving the Registeel with about half of its health, but Gio's mons are both in the red. Weird speed stats all vying for board position, Farigiraf sets Trick Room as a last resort, but it isn't strong enough to break the Registeel, as Body Press gets the KO, sending Nora to Day 2. Before we get into the last round of Day 1, I want to give a couple honorable mentions to some of the cooler stuff we saw on stream that day. In round 4, we saw an Araquanid get completely shut down by an Amoonguss. In round 5, we saw Jeremy Parsons beat up a Dundozo, which I personally love watching. And in round 6, we saw Gary Chan, a fan favorite known for using unique Pokemon, using a standard team. But going into the last match of the day, the scriptwriters delivered a YouTuber duel. Joe Ugarte versus Adi Subramanian. Adi was using his own version of Chi-Pao and Entei that featured a Dragonite, while Joe was using a team popularized by Riley Factura, featuring an Ogerpon Hearthflame and a bunch of Pokemon that do no special damage whatsoever. In Game 1, Joe leads offensively with Chi-Pao Urshifu into Adi's more defensive choice of Raging Bolt and Ogerpon Wellspring. Because Joe's Urshifu has Poison Terra, it can be used as a defensive option to make both the Raging Bolt and Ogerpon slightly less threatening. Adi doesn't love the threat of losing Follow Me support turn 1, so Entei switches in for Ogre, but Joe wastes no tempo at all, firing a double up of Close Combat and Ice Spinner into Raging Bolt, getting the knockout. Now while that play may look absurdly aggressive, nothing would be comfortable switching into this combination attack, and it would have gotten a KO on Adi's Ogerpon if it chose to Follow Me. Adi counters on the next turn with a priority double up into Ursh to pick up the KO, but Joe gets a slight lead in the damage trading with a Sacred Sword into the Entei. Fire Ogerpon then comes in for Joe. With the momentum of the set hanging in the balance, everything that can protect clicks protect. But unfortunately for Adi, this works more in Joe's favor because the next turn, with Pow open to a double up, he smartly picks off the Pow with the Sucker Punch and Ivy Cudgel. Entei finishes off the other Pow, but this trade again means that Joe is still ahead in the damage race. At least, that looked to be the case. But Joe's last piece was actually Amoonguss. This position instead looks great now for Adi, but he plays around the threat of a specific play, Spore and Spiky Shield. This opens him up to getting hit with a crucial crit, and then he loses because of it. Game 1 goes to the defending champ. In Game 2, both players try new approaches. Adi leads with Fluttermane Ogerpon into Joe's Chien-Pao and King Gambit. Joe again takes a huge turn 1 KO into Ogre, but eats a lot of damage for it as Flutter attacks in return with Dazzling Gleam. With Ogerpon gone, Raging Bolt comes in for Adi. Flutter protects, and then the Raging Bolt goes for Terra Water, but Joe makes a pretty flawless read. He protects his King Gambit and even clicks Sucker into Bolt with Pow. And Adi unfortunately threw the Thunderbolt into the Gambit Protect. Ugarte, recognizing that he can step on the gas, goes for a double Sucker Punch into Adi's Flutter for the KO. And then Adi takes out Pow with a Thunderbolt. With Adi's back up against the wall, Dragonite comes in, but it's almost forced into a position where it has to lock into Outrage, and from there, Joe can clean the game just by double targeting it.
Has been reading Adi like a book. I think Joe went to Powell's earlier today because he has all of the reads.
And no critical hit needed there at that time. That is a very strong Ogerpon with the Terrifier boost, with the +1, and Adi sees that this game has been lost and concedes, sending Joe into day 2.
And that wraps up day 1. Were you able to watch the full stream? What was your favorite match? Tell me your favorite moments in the comments below. Looking at the usage stats, there's a few trends in day 1 that met expectations, and others that did the exact opposite. The usage that we expected, Fluttermane, Ogerpon, Wellspring, and Tornadus, all hit their projected usage, but Incineroar and Amoonguss didn't end up being where we thought they might. Incineroar starting a format off with barely 40% usage feels eerie, but with all the inner focus, Water Ogerpon, Fluttermane, maybe Incineroar is not the one-size-fits-all Pokemon of the past that it used to be. Also, I almost forgot, did anyone even bring Iron Hands to this tournament? Like, anyone? Anyone at all? Entei and Raging Bolt were instant hits. Both uniquely provide built-in counterplay to the Fire Water Grass cores we'd grown used to seeing in Regulation E. The other surprising drop-offs in usage, though, were Goldengo, Dragonite, and King Gambit. These Pokemon did show up on stream a bit, but we'd have to tune into day 2 to find out what we were missing. In day 2, we didn't get a stream set until round 12, which means that 3 rounds of battling had already occurred, and things were just heating up. Our first set of the day was once again the crowd favorite, Joseph Ugarte versus Alex Underhill. And fun fact, both players have won 2 regionals each. Similar to the match we'd seen at the end of day 1, Alex was sporting the same 6 Pokemon as Adi. With a good night's sleep and possibly some insight from a friend, maybe Alex would have more to reveal about this matchup. In game 1, Joe leads Chien-Pao and King Gambit, presumably to cover for a Fluttermane Ogre lead like he did in game 2 against Adi. Alex leads Ogerpon and Entei this time, a lead we hadn't seen yet. On turn 1, Joe protects Pao to preserve Sword of Ruin, then clicks Terra Dragon on the King Gambit, likely to survive a possible double target. Alex's Ogerpon Horn Leeches into the protecting Pao, and Entei Sacred Fires the Gambit. Joe gives a nod of relief as the 50% burn chance does not trigger, and his Gambit kowtows the Entei for a whopping 90%. Alex's Ogerpon clicks Follow Me to protect the low health Entei, and Pao drops an Ice Spinner into the Ogre to get it to around half. But before Gambit can clean it off, Entei Sacred Fires into Pao, and true to its chances, it gets the burn. Both players lose their first Pokemon of the set. Raging Bolt takes the field for Alex, and Ogerpon Hearthflame hops in for Joe. The low health Entei doesn't click Extreme Speed, so it immediately goes down to Ogerpon's Ivy Cudgel. King Gambit locked into Kowtow, but Raging Bolt Draco Meteors it before it could even get the damage off. Next, Joe sends in his last Pokemon, Amoonguss, as Alex sends in a much more threatening Chien-Pao. Had the last Pokemon for Alex been Fluttermane, Joe would be in a great spot. Instead, Chien-Pao makes this much more favorable. Alex cleverly blocks the double into Pao with a Protect, and then doubles the Amoonguss the next turn to clean the game from there. Down a game, Joe reveals a new lead combo. Ogerpon Ursh into Alex's Ogerpon Dragonite. Joe's position is tough. Without a Chien-Pao lead, Choice Band Extreme Speed is very threatening. Joe's Ogerpon clicks Spiky Shield, likely because it has no HP investment and would faint to a boosted E-Speed. Alex locks in on the guaranteed damage available, uses Follow Me, while Dragonite terras and smacks the Urshifu with an extreme speed, taking more than 3/4 of its health. U-turn does solid damage into Ogre, but Joe immediately starts off on the back foot. Now Joe, recognizing Pow needed to join the party, sends in the Leopard. One more follow me on Ogre means Alex is still free to mash the extreme speed button. The second one goes into Ogerpon as Joe switches it out to King Gambit, and Joe soaks up that damage with the steel resistance, finally knocks out Ogerpon with a Sacred Sword that got redirected. On the next turn, Joe Terra Ghosts with Pow to avoid a double extreme speed knockout and goes for Sucker Punch with both of his Pokemon to try and swing the momentum by KOing Entei. But Alex flexes. As the bright lights are shining, he goes for a double extreme speed into King Gambit to avoid the 2 Sucker Punches. The next turn, Joe protects his King Gambit and smacks Dragonite with a Sacred Sword, but it survives. In return, Alex gets a Sacred Fire off into the Pow, and unfortunately gets a devastating burn. Even without the burn, Alex likely had the game locked. Everything was in range to drop to extreme speed, and Entei was still too healthy with a Sport in the back. And with that win, Alex almost secures his place in top 8, but Joe has to pray to the resistance gods and win his last round. Our next stream set was Navjeet versus Zhejiang. In case you aren't aware, it's basically a tradition at this point that somebody wins their last possible match to barely squeak into top cut and then bubbles on resistance. And unfortunately, this was that match. This type of thing is so common, in fact, that they had a second match prepared between 2 players that were pretty much guaranteed to cut. And they both did. Brandon Davis, using a pretty cool Trick Room team, ended up beating Colin Hire in a very close set. While many people probably would have enjoyed Joe Ugarte's last set of the day being on stream, the winning in set for him happened off stream. But he did win, and he barely squeaked in on resistance. And with that, our top 8 was set. We had Chupa Cross, Jose Vasquez, Brandon Davis, Colin Hire, Anton Galkin, Joseph Ugarte, Alex Underhill, and Ryan Haig. The first stream match in cut was going to be Chupa Cross versus Jose Vasquez. Chupa Cross is one of the most consistent players in the game today, recently winning the Toronto Regional Championships. Jose isn't a household name yet, but has started racking up day 2s on the West Coast Regionals last year. Chupa was using a familiar Glamora and Dondozo composition, while Jose was using a similar team to Geo where it has the Dark Ursh and Fluttermane with booster speed Icy Wind. In game 1, Chupa sends out Chienpao and Teal Mask Ogerpon into Jose's booster speed Flutter and Sash Urshifu. After scouting with Protects, Fluttermane uses Icy Wind to give Urshifu the speed advantage, but Chupa smartly throws 2 attacks into Jose's Fluttermane. Urshifu knocks out the Pow with close combat, but Jose loses his Fluttermane to an Ivy Cudgel in return. Jose sends out his Landorus as Chupa gives Dozo a grand entrance. Jose elects to Terra Poison and Sludge Bomb the Dozo and swap to Raging Bolt rather than Wicked Blow and die to a possible Wave Crash and Rocky Helmet chip. Chupa easily just goes for the Earthquake, and this punishing mistake all but seals the game. In game 2, Chupa leads Dondozo Chienpao into Jose's similar lead of Urshifu Flutter, and this time hits the gas early. He swaps in Tatsugiri, and as Fluttermane Icy Winds to give Urshi the speed advantage for next turn, Flutter drops to a Wave Crash. 2 games, 2 immediately disposed of Fluttermanes. Jose protects so he can KO the Dozo after the Icy Wind, but this was a crucial miscue, as it meant that he lost his Flutter for Dozo and trades away an important counter to the late game Scarf Tatsugiri or Powknight that can clean pretty easily. With Dark Shifu's Sucker Punch and Sword of Ruin active on the field, it looked pretty obvious that there might be a Sucker Punch going into Tatsugiri, but Chupa seems to not care and immediately plays aggressive. Draco Meteor gets launched into the Urshifu, picks up a knockout, and Lando feints to an Ice Spinner. From this position, Raging Bull comes in and the game is over. Chupa moves on to top 4. On the other side of bracket, Colin gets a rematch against Brandon Davis and takes the win this time. Alex Underhill defeats Ryan Haig to move on as well. So once again, our last match in top 8 features Joseph Ugarte, this time facing off against Anton. In game 1, Joe leads Gambit Pow. Anton leads Regidrago Ogerpon. The Follow Me from the Ogerpon redirects the Pow Ice Spinner and Kowtow from Gambit, but as Ogre feints, the Regidrago fires off a massive dragon energy for 2 huge chunks of health. Screamtail comes in for Anton, immediately threatening Encore, Disable, and a Dazzling Gleam right away. Because of the Encore Disable pressure, Anton goes aggressive. Joe doesn't use Sucker Punch with either Pokemon, so Drago's Earth Power and a Gleam from the Screamtail pick off both. Dragonite and Ogerpon come in for Joe. Joe tries to get some momentum back with a Terra Normal E-Speed, but this was just such a bad spot to be in. A Draco Meteor KOs the Dragonite after a Dragon Energy does tons of damage the first turn. In game 2, both players lead the same, and pretty much click the same thing. Follow Me and Dragon Energy for the big chunk of health as Ogerpon goes down. Screamtail once again comes in, but instead of trying to go for the Dazzling Gleam Earth Power, Anton uses some conditioning trying to get the Goldengo in for free, which succeeds. Joe does incorrectly Sucker Punch that slot. Going through the next turns would actually be pretty complex. Basically, the pressure of Encore and Disable is overwhelming, and I think probably one of Joe's worst matchups. Unless Joe gets numerous reads correct, it's hard for him to ever really secure his position. What makes it especially bad is Joe has no spread damage. Anton wins the set, unfortunately preventing the three-peat from happening. But congratulations, you played remarkably well. And that marks the end of the hero's journey. Initially for this script, I planned on covering pretty much the entirety of top 8. But after watching through the top 4 sets and the finals, they were all amazing gameplay. I highly recommend that you go check them out. But to wrap it up, the three-peat just barely eluded us. I want to personally give my appreciation to Joe for doing something so incredible. This game is crazy hard, and his consistency, even though he didn't win the event, is remarkable. Of course, I also want to give a huge congratulations to Alex Underhill for claiming his 3rd regional title. He was on fire all weekend, and his games were an absolute joy to watch. The 2024 VGC circuit is just now heating up, and it's a thrilling schedule ahead of us. If you enjoyed this recap, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Charlotte Regionals is next weekend. Tune in to the event on the official Pokemon streams link below. I myself will be there making my best attempt at a title defense. So catch you next time.